Hi, everybody. Good evening and welcome to the Finding You podcast. I'm Dr. Brad Reedy. Today is Tuesday, April 14th, 2026. Tonight, I'm going to be talking about meaning, suffering, and transformation. This is something that lately has been really near and dear to my heart. And a lot of times, it's the kind of themes that I'm exploring in my own psychotherapy and with the psychotherapy with the clients that I work with that I bring to this. And this is one of those topics that is really relevant to the work that I'm doing these days. So, before I get into that, let me talk about the upcoming announcements and the bookkeeping. If you're not a member of the Inner Circle now, you can subscribe to our podcast to get content that is not available to the public. Also, you can attend these sessions live, which include the Ask Me Anything episodes where you can interact with me live, ask questions, either listen live to my answers or listen to the answers on the podcast. So if you're interested, go to our website or email us at info@findingyouprograms.com. My 3 books, The Journey of the Heroic Parent, The Audacity to Be You, and now my co-authored book, Stay in the Room, are available on Amazon. They're also available on Audible, although the audiobook of Stay in the Room is not going to be out until sometime later. So when that happens, I'll let you have that announcement. But a wonderful, in fact, a compelling read by a wonderful storyteller and a family that went through their own transformation of consciousness. And I get to make the comments and the comments on their narrative as I go through the book and their chapters with them. If you're interested in a deep dive, Finding You therapy programs, intensives are that offering. Our next one is going to be May 13th through 17th. To remind you, that's a limited space available. It is selling out. And sometimes we played with the idea of changing the name of these events from intensives to workshops or to retreats. And at times we've thought about how each title, each name could attract different people. But let me just say this to you. The intensive part of it is the time. It's not scary or intimidating once you're in it. Once you're in it, you don't want to leave. It becomes, for most people, the safest place that they've ever been in their life by the way that we operate them, by the way that we facilitate them, and the container that we hold for you. So it's a very anxious thing to sign up for something like this. But if this work and the way that I talk about it makes sense to you, the Finding You Intensive is a wonderful springboard or accelerator to your therapy if you're already involved in psychotherapy. I think it's at least the impact of 6 months in psychotherapy in 5 days. So if you're interested in that, go to our website or email us at info@findingyouprograms.com for all other inquiries, for intensives, for couples, for families. If you're interested in attending our support group, which will be tomorrow night this month, it's always the third Wednesday of each month, then you can email us or go to our portal. If you're looking for a coach or for a therapist who works within this model, you can reach out to us and we can help connect you to somebody on our team. info@findingyouprograms.com, again, is the email. And of course, we have a portal that you can go to. With that, let me get into tonight's content. My wife was talking to me today about who this broadcast might be a good match for. She was thinking about some friends, perhaps she was thinking about some clients. And what I said to her, if somebody is in the early stages, the darkest part of their journey, the initial stage where they're feeling overwhelmed and a tremendous amount of grief or pain, this might not be the broadcast. In fact, any broadcast might not be the broadcast. In my experience, people that are in that deepest and darkest, earliest part of their transformation, of their suffering, need more listening than they do instruction, and need somebody that can be present and compassionate with them as they tell and unfold their story. So if you are experiencing or new to this work, if you're in a great deal of pain, or if you're in the early stages of grief, I want to say to you about any of these things that we offer, including our intensives, it might not be the best fit for you. This is an opportunity this evening to understand what the algorithm of life is like, what the pattern of life is like, what we go through, and how it affects us, and the transformation that occurs. And so listening to this in a non-acute phase of suffering can give you some comfort and some guidance, can give you a perspective about where you are on this journey. Also, it gives you a shared sense that you're not alone. And I'm not talking about somebody literally being present with you, but understanding that these stories, these myths, these ideas transcend our particular time in history and go back hundreds, if not thousands, and many thousands of years. That there is a pattern or patterns in this life. And when we understand them, it can give us a reference point. It can give us some context, some meaning. Oftentimes, I say one of the first things that I suggest that people learn to do as a skill for themselves is to pan out. That if you're focused and up close with your suffering, it can seem overwhelming. But if you see a perspective that is larger, that is bigger, and you realize that this is just a part of your life, that you will eventually be through and be past, and there'll be more to come, then that perspective can offer you some serenity, some grounding, and some peace. So we think about the hero's journey, the journey of finding ourselves, the journey of differentiating or individuating. We think about this story and we understand them in the context of story and myth. Joseph Campbell explained, he's a mythologist that I often refer to, he explained that mythology, you can think of storytelling, epic stories that remain. Mythology, he explained, is psychology, misread as biography, history, and cosmology. In another passage, he said, all religions are true if they are to be understood metaphorically. The problem becomes when we get literal, when we look at them in a kind of orthodox or fundamentalist kind of way, is where that idea starts to fall apart. But if we look at them mythically, symbolically, we understand that they're telling the story of our lives, similar to our dreams, right? Our dreams, Campbell explained, are our personal myth. And our myths are our shared dreams. The one thing that the artist who creates the story, the poet who creates the poem, the one thing that they have a special gift with is the ability to dip into the unconscious, to let go of the conscious mind, to let go of the current form and orthodoxy, and to allow that material from beyond our conscious awareness seep in, leak into the art. Most often I have found that what a great piece of art evokes in people over time isn't necessarily the intent of the artist. While they might be exploring one theme or idea, they find that later on it means something to somebody else. I was just reading, I'm a big fan of Eddie Vedder and Pearl Jam. Gives you a sense of my age. And Eddie was recently speaking about one of his first songs that he wrote called Black, about a heartache and a heartbreak that was tremendous. In fact, he said early in his career that listening to other people sing it caused him great upset and anger. But once he was listening to an audience sing it back, and he had the sense, the energy from that they were singing it not as a breakup, but as a liberation and as a message of hope. And he said something so profound in the interview where I saw him talking about this. He said, in that moment, the curse was lifted. The song meant something different to him. In fact, I cited the wrong song. If you're a fan of Pearl Jam, he was actually talking about the song Alive. But the message is still the same. It meant something to him as a child to learn about his deceased father that he did not know. But later on, when people were singing the chorus about being alive, it was a message of empowerment and of hope and of rebirth. And that time that he felt that the curse was lifted. So we sometimes think that ancient civilizations or other people's religions, myth is what other people's religions are often understood as. We sometimes think of them as just a story, just something that they tell themselves to explain the universe, and they're so unenlightened and unaware as we are that they've taken those myths to be literal. But what we know is that in many cases, these civilizations use these myths, these stories, these motifs, not as a way to come to certainty and answers. I've said to you many times that mental health can be understood largely as our ability to tolerate ambiguity and uncertainty. So the ancient Greeks weren't necessarily believing in a literal Zeus or a literal Aphrodite, but rather a way of explaining their experience in the world and embracing the myth, giving it form. They didn't have the kind of psychological terms that we have today from Freud and on. So they talked about these archetypes, these characters. They would say that you seem possessed by, and they would mention a certain god, and they were describing somebody's energy, somebody's psychology. That's what Jung talks about when he talks about archetypes. There are these symbolic roles, the magician, the trickster, the high priestess, or what have you. Those archetypes are a way of describing a certain kind of way that somebody is in the world, a certain kind of personality structure or trait. Now we have phrases like borderline and narcissistic personality disorder and depression and anxiety. We have very clinical terms to talk about it, but these myths are an attempt to give form to the mystery that is our lives. I was once asked by somebody during a parent group, not too long ago actually, that I was teaching, and I was talking about if we try to medicate or run from our pain, there are where the symptoms arise, there where the symptoms appear. And so we have to learn to feel our pain. And somebody asked the question, why do we have to suffer at all? Why do we have to have so much pain? And I was taken back by the question. And in essence, I answered with something like, well, that's just life. That's just inevitable. But I've thought about that question for a long time, and I have my answer today. I have my answer in this broadcast. The first answer is the first answer that came to me, in my opinion, my perspective, and that is that it is the way. The Tao, right? The Tao is the way, the life force, the life energy, the way life is. I often refer to Star Wars as a myth that can be accessible to a lot of people of a certain age, because it was based on Joseph Campbell's work. And so it's very fundamental in terms of our understanding of the psychology of what it means to be a human being. And I often refer to the dark side, right? When we are overwhelmed by our fear or our sadness or our loss, our grief, our hurt or our pain, when our suffering becomes too much to us, we choose anger, we choose hate, we choose judgment, and ultimately we choose control. That's the temptation. That's the draw of the dark side of the force. But somebody asked me recently, how do people get recruited to the force, and what is the force? And my answer was, the force is life. It's the Tao. If you could imagine the universe, the world that we live in, like a river that flows in a certain way, the force or the Tao or the way is that river. But because we want to prevent our suffering and the suffering of the people that we love, which is really our empathic suffering, we try to control the flow of the universe. We dam up rivers. We divert them to where we want them to head. We swim up streams. We spend a tremendous amount of energy resisting the flow, resisting life. Because to live is to die. To love is to grieve. To care is to suffer. To feel joy means that we will feel pain. And in Western psychology, Western spirituality, there is this bifurcation, this separation. We have this idea that we can prevent pain and sadness and suffering, right? We have so much medication, so much anesthesia, so many escapes and distractions from our pain. But of course, it's not hard to find a story, a movie that shows that when we try to avoid our pain, we end up with an empty, meaningless life, a joyless, soulless life. So we learn with the help and the support of others, maybe others who have gone a little farther on the journey that we have. We lean on their wisdom to understand that this is the way, that you're not off track. That if you have a child that's suffering or struggling, that this is not a detour. This is the way. And any attempt to not go through it authentically will cause our suffering to be even greater and longer. Thich Nhat Hanh, the Buddhist monk, explained, and of course, Eastern religions, specifically Buddhism, doesn't do that bifurcation, that separation from pain and joy. They see them as the opposite sides of the same coin. And if you get rid of your pain, you get rid of your joy. If you get rid of your loss or your grief, you get rid of your love. And so Thich Nhat Hanh taught that by explaining it this way. He said, it's not the impermanence of life that causes us to suffer. What makes us suffer is wanting things to be permanent when they are not. In fact, if you watch a good vampire movie or another kind of movie, supernatural movie, where people live forever, you eventually experience what the character would inevitably, what anybody would inevitably experience if that were the case, which is suffering, meaninglessness, loss after loss after loss. It is the impermanence and the temporary nature of life that gives life its value. But we're so afraid of death. Death is just a part of life, so it's really that we're afraid of life. But I'll say it this way. We're so afraid of death. We're so afraid of what we can't see, what we can't comprehend, what we have no experience with, that we gravitate toward doctrines and dogma and psychologies that promise us everlasting life. But as Campbell points out, eternity is now. And if you can't experience that right now, you'll never experience it. But eternity is now, and joy can be found in this moment. Everybody that you and I love, as far as we know, so far, this based on history, this is absolutely true. Everybody that you know and love and care about will be dead someday, gone someday. Even if we extend life the way we've been able to do with medicine and science and technology, no matter what we do, even if people live to be 150 or 200, eventually there will be loss. And if we don't get on board with that, if we try to prevent it, that's where the suffering occurs. It is resisting the Tao, going away from the way, the path that causes our suffering. Leonard Cohen wrote in one of his poems this idea in a much simpler and, of course, beautiful symbolic way. He said, if you don't become the ocean, you'll be seasick every day. So we learn to surrender, to let go of the things that we can't control. We learn to feel. We learn to find comfort with others in our feeling. We tell our story to somebody that can listen and sit with our unsolvable problems. We then learn to sit with our children even better, to sit with our clients if we're a therapist, to sit with our loved ones, our spouses, our friends, in their unsolvable problems. And we do that because we realize that the thing that we have to offer for people for their unavoidable pain is our presence, our nervous system. That's the human condition, that we are better together, and that the lie of separation is maybe what causes our greatest pain. The poet Rumi explained about our pains. He said, these pains you feel are messengers. Listen to them. So in Buddhism or the Eastern religions, in this kind of psychology that I talk about, we don't try to get rid of our pains. We don't try to get rid of our rage. We don't even try to get rid of our symptoms before we spend time understanding what they're trying to tell us. Think about that even if you're a parent of a child struggling with mental health or addiction issues. I wrote this in The Journey of the Heroic Parent. If you try to get rid of the symptom before taking the time to listen to what that symptom, the message that it has to offer, you'll miss the entire point. And the issue, the feeling, the unexpressed or unheard message will crop up somewhere else in the garden. So we learn to listen. If we had a parent that could sit with us in our pain, that provided what psychologists call a secure attachment, we would know this intuitively. We would know to listen, to not teach, to not give trite answers, we would know that a broadcast or a podcast like this wouldn't be the right thing for somebody in that acute phase of suffering, like I mentioned at the outset. So it is, in essence, the way that life is. You can't dam up in a river. You can't take away all the bad water. If you dam up the water, you're damming up all of it. This leads me to my second point about suffering and transformation. This idea of the narcissistic wound. I know I refer to this very quickly in the context of other broadcasts, but I want to take a moment and explain it. The narcissistic wound is the wound that everybody has more or less of. And simply put, it's the wound not being seen and met and loved as you are. It's the belief, or you might even say the experience that one has that suggests that you have to be good or valuable in some objective way. The way that you look, how much you weigh, how much money you make or can create, your accomplishments, your successes, to just be good, to not have needs, don't be needy. Maybe it's not to have a certain feeling like anger or sadness, that there's something you need to do to earn love and belonging. That's the narcissistic wound, and everybody has some of it. Narcissism itself is when that wound is so immense and powerful that it crosses the threshold, where it becomes a way of describing a person's personality structure. That's narcissism. And remember, as off-putting as narcissists are, and as much damage as they do in the world, and they do quite a lot, as harmful and hurtful as they can be, and as off-putting as they can be, if we spend a lot of time talking about the narcissists out there, we will miss the opportunity to see and to deal with the little narcissist that is in us, the little narcissistic wound that is in us. So I don't spend a lot of time thinking about narcissists. I spend a lot of time thinking about all of us and our tendency to believe that we somehow have to prove our worth. We have to prove our lovability. So that's the narcissistic wound that we all have. And this is where it gets, I think, very interesting. The greatest barrier, the greatest block that leads to resisting dealing with or coping with or looking at the narcissistic wound is success. So if your wound is that you have to make money to be loved, and you make a lot of money, it's really going to be hard to be motivated to look at the wound. If you're supposed to be look a certain way or weigh a certain weight on the scale, and you happen to be blessed with high cheekbones and with a fast metabolism, or you're very, very rigorous in what you eat and how you exercise, it may be hard eventually to look at yourself until, of course, age starts to win the battle. And then people that have this wound, if they haven't addressed it, often that's where the surgeries, right? The stuff comes in, and there's no judgment there with any of this. There's just compassion. Success is the greatest barrier to folks looking at their mental health issues. And at the core of all of our mental health issues, more or less, is this narcissistic wound. Whenever I'm talking to anybody, anywhere, myself even, I'm thinking in terms of where somebody might fall on this continuum of the narcissistic wound. How much does it have hold of them? How much is it a central theme in their life? What that suggests then is that the catalyst for our entry into this mental health journey is failure, suffering, pain. Sometimes it's the pain of a child. You know, that can be a difficult moment for a parent who they themselves have had great success in their life by most measures. But then they have a child who struggles. And that child then becomes the messenger, the teacher that's come into your life to help you look at this thing. And because parents will do just about anything for their children, you will go to places that you would never go otherwise. You will walk into a 12-step meeting or a support group or a therapist's office or a parenting class or an intensive because you believe that some of the critical answers to help your child are in those places. So you will go there. So even for people that I've dealt with, and you might imagine because of the price point of mental health services, I have dealt with some pretty successful people financially, that is. It was only when their child was in great peril, great pain, great suffering, that they found the need and the will to look at themselves. So Freud taught, if you want somebody to learn something important, something spiritually transformative, set them up in a situation in which they will fail. The best examples of that I know of are marriage and children. Because there's nothing in my experience more complex and impossible than those relationships. There will be nothing. There will be nothing in your life that you will fail at more, that you care about, than those intimate relationships, than parenting. The Catholic priest, who's a psychoanalytic writer, says that he prays for one small humiliation every day because that humiliation, that's the narcissistic wound being revealed. That's the ego, the part of ourselves that wants to be good or convinces ourselves that we're good, that everything in our conscious mind is all that's in play. And the humiliation is the ego dying, the authentic self. It's the breeding ground, the soil where the authentic self springs up from. So now today, instead of trying to avoid humiliations, I'm learning to embrace them. I'm learning to be a fool by asking questions, by not knowing. I'm learning to admit that I don't know, learning to admit that. And when I have a humiliation with something that happened yesterday or last week or last month, instead of merely shuddering and kind of that shame that we feel when we remember that thing, I welcome it. And instead of trying to prevent it from happening in the future, I expect that something like that will happen in the future. And all I can hope is that it's a series of small humiliations like Rohr talks about or Jung talks about. That's what I can hope for. I've said before that getting married and having children is something we should avoid if we possibly can because of the pain, suffering, and struggle that they offer to us. But I say that somewhat tongue-in-cheek, of course, because I can't think of any better way to find one's meaning in life, to find a connection to something larger than yourself, like being a parent or a brother or a sister or a sibling, being a Smith or a Johnson or a Reedy in my case. Part of what gives me great meaning is understanding that my job is to help my children get to where they need to go. So I can suffer dissatisfaction and great difficulty because I'm tied into that bigger meaning, right? That's the message from Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning. Borrowing from Nietzsche, he said, if we have a why, we can endure almost anyhow. So part of these podcasts for me are to give you a different perspective, to pan out, and to maybe offer some concepts, some ideas where you can find meaning in it. When my therapist said to me when my son was turning 18 that I was talking about my grief about him leaving, and she said he needs to get as far away from you as he can, I thought to myself, now I can do it with gladness. I can let him go. I can let my children go. I have my last child finishing up her senior year, ready to go to college in the fall. And I was thinking about it last night at dinner about how painful and difficult that last child is going to be for me for so many reasons. And the anticipation of that pain was quite clear last night. And what will allow me to do it is my belief, my faith, that it's important for her to go away from me, to find herself. When I teach parents, I wrote in The Journey of the Heroic Parent, when I teach parents, often somebody says in the audience, I wish I had this information when my children were young. Unfortunately, I wrote, when something is not immediately relevant, we usually pay little attention to it. The experience of parenting a struggling child is the most powerful way we can learn. It offers us something that we cannot get in any other way. And if we fail to embrace, no matter how painful or scary the journey of parenting a struggling child is, we'll also miss the journey the lesson that journey, the treasure that journey has to offer. For me, parenting a struggling child offers so many gifts, including increased compassion for others who suffer, clarity in recognizing our boundary, and improved self-care. So I talk about this idea that the child is not the student, the parent is the student, and the child is the teacher. Not because the child is more wise, but to be a parent, we have to face our humanity. To be an effective parent, a parent who can offer the child some sense of security, we have to be willing to look at our shadow, the parts of ourselves that we have jettisoned, that we have exiled to fit in. We have to look to our histories. So when you come to Finding You, it doesn't matter what the presenting complaint is in your life today. We look backwards to understand how you were cooked, what it meant, without judgment. And when you listen to the stories of the 6 other people, you hear yourself in it. You might get more out of it than your own work. In fact, invariably, people say they get much more out of other people's work than they do out of their own. But you start to see the treasure that is offered by the suffering. In fact, you often feel compelled and motivated for more of it, more therapy, more questions, more talking, more listening. I've shared recently this idea by Joseph Campbell that I'll read to you the quote that I've shared 4 or 5 times in the last 10 episodes or so. But then I'm going to translate it into different words to make the point that I've been trying to teach and refer to. This quote specifically is about marriage. But I want to make a bigger point about it. Here's the original quote. Joseph Campbell said, I think that one of the problems is in marriage is that people don't realize what it is. They think it's a long love affair, and it isn't. Marriage has nothing to do with being happy. It has to do with being transformed. And when the transformation is realized, it is a magnificent experience. But you have to submit. You have to yield. You have to give. You can't just dictate. Right? If you're the president of the company, the president of the United States, you're the king of the world. If you're in charge and wealthy and everybody is catering to you, everybody's telling you yes, telling you what you want to hear, it's going to be pretty hard to grow. That's why some of the most powerful experience that I've borne witness to are when I've seen people that in so many of life's measures have achieved incredible success. Academy Awards, Fortune 500 CEOs, right? Gold, platinum albums, all the stuff. Their name in books, all of it. But then they get a teenager and they say to me, everything was going just fine until my child turned 13 or until I had a child with an attachment disorder or until I had a child that was struggling with substances. And I want to get back to that peace. But this pain, like Rumi said, is a messenger. It is here to wake you up to a different level of consciousness. That's the transformation. The transformation is you become something different than you were at the start of the journey. In the myths or the epic stories that I was referring to that Joseph Campbell teaches about, and the common heroic journey, the protagonist has new qualities, a new way of looking at the world, a new perspective by the end. That is the transformation. I think about this recently. I was raised in the Christian religion. I am not now, do not identify as a Christian. I subscribe to Joseph Campbell's idea that all religions are true when understood in a certain way. But my mother tongue, if you will, is Christianity. So I have more information accessible to that. So what I noticed about the way that Jesus talked in the Bible is that he was asked a question often a question about rules and laws, about what somebody should or shouldn't do. And most often he never answered the question. Does that sound familiar to my longtime listeners? He doesn't tell them what to do. He tells them a story that helps them think about it differently, that gives them a glimpse into a transformation of consciousness, a different vantage point, a different way of seeing the world. They want specific rules. They want to be told what to do. They want to know what the law is. And he's saying there's no salvation in those rules and those laws. Those laws, those rules, those ceremonies, those symbols are meant to bring you closer to this consciousness. But you've let the behavior, right? You've let it eclipse the idea, the feeling. So, with that in mind, I took Campbell's quote and I wrote this version of it. I think one of the problems with life is that most people don't realize what it is. They think the goal is to enjoy lifelong joy. But that's not it. Life isn't necessarily about being happy. It has to do with being transformed. And when the transformation is realized, it is a magnificent experience. But you have to submit. You have to yield. You have to give. You can't just dictate. This is not about passivity. People on the spiritual journey aren't passive. They just understand very clearly the difference between what they can control and what they can't control. Some of you might be familiar with the Serenity Prayer, which is most often stated at the conclusion of a 12-step meeting. It goes like this: God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. So those who embrace this Tao, this way, those who find the serenity and the peace in allowing themselves to feel and finding comfort in the presence of others, experience a transformation. And it is so profound and magnificent. It is to be understood as heaven, right here, right now. Right? The kingdom of heaven is here now. In the Egyptian Book of the Dead, it says that. Far away from the Gospels in the New Testament, it says, the kingdom of God is within you. He who looks inward will find it. So the suffering, the struggling is here to lift the scales from your eyes, to open your eyes, to help you see yourself in this life more clearly. And it's not going to be my explanation that will do the transforming for you. It will be your experience. Jamie Gill writes in one of her books, since rational argument and learning won't work, what will? It would seem any improvement in the situation requires a direct experience of a different context. We have to think about things differently. We only have our context. That is why transformation has such a significant history, she writes. Typically, when you learn something, the base does not shift. In a transformation, on the other hand, it is precisely the base that shifts. It is the nature of a transformation. The things are seen from a different angle. The more profound the base shift, the more profound the transformation. So it's not first order change. It's not skill building. It's not learning to regulate your nervous system with box breathing, what can be helpful in a moment. It's not tapping. It's not finding the one trauma that caused it all. It's not that. It's learning to see things differently. It's learning to understand yourself differently. It's learning something like, an example of a transformation, is that the child and their mental health problems are a great gift. And someday, if you stay the course, keep your heart open, learn how to feel and to suffer authentically, legitimately, as Jung calls it, find comfort in the presence of others who can hold space for you because they themselves have been transformed because of their suffering. So they have the capacity, the spaciousness to just sit, to not offer trite slogans or sayings, but just to listen. If you do that, you will come to be grateful for this gift that a struggling child has offered you, even though it was wrapped in the most hideous wrapping paper ever. Jamie went on to write, especially with regard to emotional matters, description may not be the most effective route to take. Here, it may be preferable to evoke the emotion or experience. We evoke the experience by the suffering, by going through it. Not distracting, not medicating ourselves through it, not dissociating, not ignoring or denying it. We go through it. We feel it. I love what Thich Nhat Hanh says about one of the outcomes of our suffering. The transformation that he speaks of is that our compassion comes out of our suffering. This is my favorite and most compelling answer to the question, why must we suffer? And for me, the result of my suffering has given me greater compassion for myself and others, less judgment. And I cannot tell you how joyful that experience has been to judge less, myself and others. And I still have a ways to go. Thich Nhat Hanh, the Buddhist teacher and monks, wrote, "To me, the definition of hell is simple. It is a place where there is no understanding and no compassion. We have all been to hell. We are acquainted with hell's heat and know that hell is in need of compassion. If there is compassion, then hell ceases to be hell. You can generate this compassion yourself. If you can bring a little compassion to this place, a little bit of understanding, it ceases to be hell. Your practice consists in generating compassion and understanding and bringing them to hell with you." And he goes on to write, "Many people aspire to go to a place where pain and suffering do not exist, a place where there is only happiness. This is a rather dangerous idea, for compassion is not possible without pain and suffering. Compassion is not possible without pain and suffering. It is only when we enter into contact with suffering that understanding and compassion can be born. Without suffering, we do not have the opportunity to cultivate compassion and understanding. And without understanding, there can be no true love. So we should not imagine a place where there is no suffering, where there is only happiness. That would be a very naive idea. We learned to find our meaning in our suffering. And the meaning that I find most sweet to my taste is the compassion for others where I had judgment before. I know before my great season of suffering back in 2010, that I had less compassion for people who seemed to be the victims of the pain that they created for themselves. I could see how they were creating it by their choices. And somehow that led me to think that they deserved less of my compassion. But then I realized that everybody's pain, in one sense or another, is their responsibility, is because of who they are and the way that they're thinking and living their life. And frankly, because my pain was self-caused, it didn't hurt any less. So now, today, I don't have much interest in folks who say to other people, well, that's just your karma, or that's just your choice, or your suffering is self-chosen. I don't think that way anymore. Because if I do, borrowing again from my experience, having grown up Christian, from my Bible experience, if we do operate that way, then we will come to realize what Jesus said to Peter, which is, You live by the sword, you die by the sword. You lose your compassion for somebody who seems to be choosing their pain, and you'll find yourself very, very lonely indeed when you come to realize that you are the cause of your suffering. It's not the events outside of you. It's who you have become up to this point. Carl Jung said that neuroses, mental health problems, issues, symptoms, neuroses is always a substitute for legitimate suffering. And that is to say, to feel it, to not medicate it away. Not even to use spiritual ideas as spiritual bypasses. When spirituality, when religion is presented to take away somebody's pain, it stops being a spiritual practice and it starts being a spiritual bypass. Yes, it gives us an anchor, it gives us a perspective like I'm talking about. But I have to go through. I have to go through the pain. I have to feel it. And if we can learn to suffer, and again, we best learn to do that in the presence of others, we are transformed, we are changed. Viktor Frankl in Man's Search for Meaning said, happiness cannot be pursued. It must ensue. It happens. That's very similar to what I teach and talk about all the time. This is not a doing psychology. This is a being psychology. It moves much slower than a doing psychology. The result of it is freedom and peace and serenity and a deep sense of meaning through the pain and the sadness and the hurt of life. But if the goal is happiness, then you might want to try heroin, opiates, and take those until they don't work anymore, until you die. I think so much of what we have communicated to our children is that pain is to be avoided because we can't tolerate it. We don't teach that. Overtly, we teach that pain is something we have to endure. But experientially, viscerally, behaviorally, we act as if it's something to be avoided in our life and in their life. And maybe my favorite connection between pain, suffering, transformation is this poem from Khalil Gibran, On Pain, where he writes, and a woman spoke, saying, tell us of pain. And he said, your pain is the breaking of the shell that encloses your understanding. Even as the stone of the fruit must break, that its heart may stand in the sun, so must you know pain. And could you keep your heart in wonder at the daily miracles of your life, your pain would not seem less wondrous than your joy. I found when I was diagnosed with MS in 2015, after a couple of months of feeling really depressed about it, but as I came out of that depression, I started to realize something the Buddhists had been talking about. I'd been reading from the Buddhists for a long time, that my ability to feel things, because my symptoms of MS, of multiple sclerosis, are mostly manifested in numbness. That's currently, to date, my most common pain. Today, I'm kind of a high level of numbness. I would say I'm probably feeling 70% of my kind of pre-MS feeling in my hands and feet and parts of my arms. That's just how my MS waxes and wanes. So when I feel a pain, I remember I was in the wilderness and my toes were cold in the cold weather, which I used to hate. I had the experience of, I'm so glad I can feel my toes hurt because that means that I can feel. A friend of mine who was grieving the same loss of another friend, and I told him that sometimes I have to look away from it. And he said to me very gently, he said, yes, but the fact that you feel so much pain reminds us all that you're alive. You're alive, and so you can feel pain. So I have a different relationship with my pain than I used to. I have a different relationship with my loss. Even as the stone of the fruit must break, that its heart may stand in the sun, so you must know pain. And could you keep your heart in wonder at the daily miracles of your life, your pain would not seem less wondrous than your joy. And you would accept the seasons of your heart, even as you have always accepted the seasons that pass over your fields. And you would watch with serenity through the winters of your grief. Much of your pain is self-chosen. It is the bitter potion by which the physician within you heals your sick self. Therefore, trust the physician and drink his remedy in silence and tranquility. For his hand, though heavy and hard, is guided by the tender hand of the unseen. And the cup he brings, though it burns your lips, has been fashioned of the clay which the potter has moistened with his own sacred tears. We recognize that our suffering brings transformation and freedom if we allow ourselves to feel it. If we don't, it causes even more suffering. So, it's the experience of being alive that we experience with our pain. The experience of somebody that we love and have lost. Again, this is not a message I would give to somebody in the acute phases of grief. But those who have gone through it know that you can't get rid of the loss without getting rid of love. It's all part of being alive. And ultimately, we become more mindful. In my sense, in my language, I don't talk about practicing gratitude. We become mindful of what is, which inevitably leads to gratitude. So I don't focus on what I'm grateful for. I focus on what is. And that inevitably leads me to be grateful for, as Thich Nhat Hanh says, the non-toothache that I feel right now. I don't have a toothache, and I hope you don't either. So you could take a moment and you could run your tongue along your teeth and be mindful and thus grateful for not having a toothache. The freedom that comes from suffering as we work through it is ultimately the goal of psychotherapy. Amor Mas said, the spiritual journey is not about becoming someone who knows more. It's about becoming so open, so undefended, that even the unknown no longer disturbs you. Awareness doesn't seek safety, it is safety. That is the freedom, that is the transformation. That is nirvana, that is heaven, which is a state of being, not an address or a place, but a metaphor for a way of being in relationship to this world. I was thinking about this week on a last note. Many people I've worked with over the years, of course, have struggled with anxiety. It's a very common, it's maybe the common lot for people today. And what I learned is that there's a relationship between our anxiety of the future and our grief of things lost. If we can learn to grieve, that is, learn to feel, which is often best accomplished in the presence of an empathic, compassionate, secure person in our lives, a therapist, a mentor. Early in life, it was a parent, ideally. If we can learn to grieve and become a larger person, right? Our grief doesn't shrink. If you've been through it, you know what I'm going to say. We become larger. Our grief doesn't shrink, but we become different or larger, so we can hold it a little bit easier. If we have that lived experience, then we'll be less afraid of tragedy befalling us in the future. If we still haven't grieved all the way, in this way of thinking, anxiety, our level of it, can be a measure of how complete our grief is. Do you see? If you know you're going to be okay because you've authentically suffered successfully before and come out the other end a larger and new person, you will not be terrified. You will not try to control. You will not try to cling tight to life. You will accept what life has to bring. For the take-homes, I wrote this. When you're in acute pain, you might just need to be heard. This might not be the broadcast for you. You might need to talk about your sadness, your anger, your betrayal, your loss, your hurt, your pain, etc. We learn to accept life, the Tao, the way. We learn to become the ocean. We learn to accept the seasons. I grew up in Southern California where there were no seasons. I moved to Utah, and for 20 years, I was angry with where I lived on the earth, the latitude at which I lived, the tilt of the earth, the angle of the sun. I was angry at winter for 20 years, I would complain about it to friends, to my therapist, until I learned to go with the winter. It's a quieter time. It's a time to rest, a time to go inward. We learn to make meaning. In psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy, that's one of the important things. The better you are at being a meaning maker, of seeing the meaning, the symbol, the connection, the greater you can tie it into something larger than you, the better. If making meaning is hard for you, psychedelics could be a catalyst. Talk to your psychedelic therapist practitioner to find out more. We have brought somebody on that will do that at Evoke also. In fact, she's going to be... My dog is barking. I'm going to wait for a second. She's barking right outside my door. So let me just wait a second. I know this is kind of unconventional, but I want to end strong. So I'm going to delete this when I broadcast the podcast. Let me go take care of my dog, and I'll be back in 30 seconds. I only have about a minute left. Compassion and meaning are often found through suffering. And compassion is, if the lack of compassion is hell, then a lot of compassion might be heaven. My favorite example is to cite the story in Les Mis, where the protagonist was given grace by the bishop for the silver that he stole after he assaulted the bishop. And it was that compassion, that non-judgment, that transformed his life. Now, you might argue to yourself, well, nobody changes that way, and addicts take advantage of generous people like that all the time. And you're right about those literal examples. But in the end, the balm that heals, the balm that soothes us, is drenched in compassion and grace. The goal of myth and epic stories, the ones that endure, is to illustrate the transformation of consciousness. So when somebody asks me a question about what to do, I answer with an analogy or a story or an example that helps them think about it differently. And then they decide what to do. Thinking things should be a certain way, that we need to get back on track, that we're off track, that this detour really sucks, is to go backwards or to stay stuck. So we learn to accept the experience that we're having of pain and of loss. Because if we don't accept those, we don't get the rich fruit, the treasure, the gold that those experiences have to offer us. And ultimately, it's the idea of non-duality from Buddhism and Eastern religions. You can't get rid of the yin without the yang. They're all a part of one great whole, and that whole is called our life. All right, folks. My 3 books, The Journey of the Heroic Parent, The Audacity to Be You, and Stay in the Room, my co-authored book, are available on Amazon. If you would like to attend a workshop with me, I'll be in Rhinebeck, New York, at the Omega Institute, July 12th through 17th, co-facilitating with my daughter Emma, the workshop, The Audacity to Be You, Learn to Love Your Horrible Rotten Self, a 5-day workshop. It's only $500, June 12th through 17th. If you're interested, go to eomega.org, click on the workshops tab, and then sign up with The Audacity to Be You. If the fall works better for you or the geography works better for you, I'll be teaching the same class with my daughter Emma at the Art of Living Retreat Center in North Carolina, September 27th to October 2nd. Same format, same cost, same everything, different center. So I'll be there in the fall. If you're interested, go to the Art of Living Center, artoflivingretreatcenter.org, artoflivingretreatcenter.org for more information. You can also go to our portal or email us at info@findingyouprograms.com. We'd be happy to set you up with a link. We'll be running the May 13th Finding You. If you're interested, sign up now. That'll be co-run by Jordan June, Dr. Jordan June, and by our new therapist who has a lot of experience in psychedelics. So if that's something that interests you, this might be a good one to attend because you can answer and learn a lot by talking to her. For all their inquiries or private intensives for couples or families, for support group registration, which will be tomorrow night, third Wednesday of each month, or for a coach or a therapist who works in the model that I talk about and teach, you can go to our portal or email us at info@findingyouprograms.com. I'll be back next week, a week from tonight on April 21st with my next broadcast, so I look forward to that. Thank you for joining me this evening. I hope this is a helpful point of contact in your week. And of course, for on behalf of the people that you love and the people that love you, thanks for showing up to these and listening and looking and transforming and authentically suffering, because you doing your work makes all the difference in the world. Have a great evening, and I'll talk to you next Tuesday. Take care. Bye-bye.